So today's title is called He Got $2,000 and I Don't Even Get a Hello. So today is going to be, another compare and contrast. I grew up overseas. So I grew up in the Eastern world for the first 10 years of my life. And after that, I was brought to the US, and where I grew up in the Western world. And I always like to compare the cultures and the way of life. It's always interesting to me because, what people say and what I've experienced don't always match. And so I always like to talk about that because for me, having been to both sides of the world, East versus West, and what's always said, what the belief is not always reality. And so I want to talk a little bit about some experiences I've had living in America. So, in my culture, and I am from India, so in my culture, anytime there's a special occasion, we always give money or we give gifts. But usually a lot of times it's money. So, anytime there's a birthday or an anniversary, or like if it's Mother's Day or Father's Day, something like that, usually people give money. So, my husband is American. He was born and raised in America. He is not Indian, he's fully American. So, just because he's married to me, whenever it's his birthday, or if it's our anniversary, or if it's Father's Day, my parents send him money. And usually, it's $100. Sometimes it's $200. There was probably a time where he probably got $500. But one time, my parents sent him $2,000. Just because it was, like I said, it was either his birthday or it was our anniversary or it was Father's Day. It was one of those three, and my parents sent him $2,000 just because we're married. And, because basically he's their son in law. So they sent him literally, hundreds of dollars minimum. And every once in a while, $1,000 or $2,000. So that's actually very normal in Indian culture to receive money. And so, but it's really interesting because, my husband's parents, on the other hand, well, I don't get money, and that's fine. I'm not, they're American, they're not Indian. I don't expect them to follow my Indian, culture. But, and, they don't have a lot of money anyway, so I don't expect them to send me any money. But, they don't ask me how I am. They don't even say hello. They don't say, how are you? They don't even, they barely acknowledge me usually. When they came to visit, we had just had our first child. They came to see their grandchild and didn't really ask me how I was doing, didn't ask me anything about how was the pregnancy, how was the birth, nothing like that. Didn't even ask me any questions. And they didn't want any pictures of me. So it was funny because, of course, they brought a camera, but they only used the camera when I wasn't in the room. They made sure to get zero photographs of me. They got pictures of themselves with the baby. They got pictures of my husband with the baby. They got both grandparents holding the baby, and they made sure never to use the camera when I was in the room. They only used it when I was not in the room. So they intentionally kept me out of their photographs. So, this is interesting because, see, this is one difference, one big difference in American culture versus the culture that I grew up in. In my culture, it's all about including the person. So, my husband, even though he's not Indian, is included as part of the family. So, when my parents meet him and when they visit him, they always ask him how he is. They say, hello, how are you? How's your job? How are things going? They want to take photographs of him. They want photographs of him holding the baby. And, they took photographs of me and him and the baby together, all three of us together. But my husband's parents, Americans, did nothing like that. They made sure to intentionally keep me out. So, it's really interesting. So, yeah, so my parents make sure to include my husband in everything. They give him hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars, just for being married to me. And his parents, the Americans, can't even say hello to me. They don't ask how I am. It's interesting. They make sure to exclude me at every opportunity they can. Um, and, this is just the way it is. And so we were actually going to visit them and they live, more in the Midwest. And we were going to visit them, all three of us. And his mother, my husband's mother, so technically my mother-in-law, although she definitely doesn't behave like a mother, but she told everybody that her grandchild was coming and her son was coming. She didn't tell anybody I was coming. So people at the party were surprised that I was there. And they're like, "Oh, she didn't tell us you were coming. She just said that, your husband and the baby are coming. She didn't say you were coming." See, again, my parents don't do that. My parents would brag that, our son-in-law is going to be here too, and our granddaughter is going to be here. So, that's a really good example of differences between the two cultures, East versus West. What I think is interesting, though, is people for decades and decades have always said that Western countries are civilized, that Americans are civilized, that they have better manners. But in my experience, they don't. Because it is completely free to say hello to somebody. It's completely free to ask somebody how they are doing and how are things going. It takes no money at all. It's completely free to include someone in a photograph. I mean, it's something stupid, but it's at the same time it's kind of a big deal because I just gave birth to their grandchild and they just want to make sure they exclude me. And so it's completely free to treat somebody well, but yet my in-laws don't do that. So then, people will say, well, that's just your in-laws and everybody has bad in-laws and blah, blah, blah. But actually, that's not true either. Because I've lived in America now for 29 years. 29 years. And I have had this type of experience over and over and over with Americans. Another example I'm going to give is one of my old roommates. And I'm just going to call her Vicky. That wasn't her real name, but just to protect her privacy, I'm just going to call her Vicky. So Vicky was moving in. I had already moved in, and Vicky was moving in. And I helped her move in, with some of her stuff. I helped her bring in some of her things. And then her mother was there, Vicky's mother. We'll just call her Mrs. Smith, again, just to protect their privacy. And so Vicky was in her room, and her mother was standing in the living room, kitchen area, and they were just yelling back and forth, talking back and forth, And so when I saw that her mother had come, I went outside to introduce myself to her, which is how I was raised. I was raised that, when someone comes to your house like this, or when you're meeting your friend's parents or anybody, you introduce yourself to them. So I went out there, immediately to talk to Vicky's mother, introduce myself. And I stood right next to her. I stood about 2 feet away from her, not too close, but not so far away, like that she wouldn't realize what I was doing. I stood close enough to her that she would understand I was standing there for her. She completely ignored me. Completely ignored me. And her and Vicky just kept going back and forth, talking and yelling about whatever that needed to be done, or, having a conversation about whatever. And she just kept standing there in the kitchen and living room with me standing there. This probably went on for about 10 minutes. And I just stood there waiting to introduce myself to her and waiting to say hello. And this woman, Vicky's mother, just kept ignoring me the entire time. She didn't look at me, didn't glance at me, didn't stop talking with Vicky to just, say hello, how are you, nothing. Finally, after several minutes of them just going back and forth and talking, there was a little gap. There was a gap in their conversation. And I immediately took that opportunity and I said, "Hello, Mrs. Smith. Nice to meet you." I introduced myself and I said, I'm going to be Vicky's roommate. I just wanted to stop by and say hello and introduce myself. And that's the only time she finally acknowledged me. And she said, "Oh, hello, nice to meet you." And then she went right back talking to Vicky. That is so rude. It's not even funny. That is so rude. And, the way that I was raised, I immediately internalized this like I had done something wrong. And it took me a long, long, long time to understand. It wasn't that I did anything wrong. It was just that Vicky's mother, an American, white, blue eyes, brown hair, she was just rude. And this experience I've had over and over and over with many different Americans. They're just rude. It costs nothing to say hello to somebody. It costs nothing to have good manners. It costs nothing to just say hello, nice to meet you. I'm Vicky's mother. Nothing, nothing. I had to wait there for several minutes while they stopped talking before she even acknowledged me. And the only reason she did is because I started talking to her and I shook her hand. This is how I was raised, overseas, in the Eastern world, where we actually are raised with manners. And, we're told that Americans are civilized people and that they're better than we are. So my experience is that this is not true. So that's another example. And I have more examples just like that. I had another friend. Her name was Allison. And one day I was, hanging out with Allison in her house. And her mother walked in the front door. And her mother, I was sitting right there in the living room. She saw me, completely ignored me. And she just started talking to Allison. Completely ignored me. And they just started talking about something and they were arguing about something. And I'm sitting right there, Allison's mother completely ignores me. And then again, this went on for several minutes. And finally, and I think it was Allison, I actually don't remember exactly who did what, but I think it was Allison. And she finally said, "Hi, Mom, this is my friend." And then she introduced me to her mother. That's the only time her mother looked at me, smiled, gave me like a very quick, brief smile. And then she immediately went back to talking to Allison and whatever they were fighting about. I just could not believe it. That's the other thing we don't do. We don't fight in front of people. Like if there's a problem, you don't argue about it in front of friends. I mean, you definitely don't ignore them. And that's the difference too. And when my parents meet my friends, like they immediately say, "Hello, how are you?" They go up to them, they introduce themselves, and they immediately start talking to them and ask them how they are and how's their job, how's their life, how's their family. They immediately include them. They don't just ignore them, and they definitely don't start like yelling at me in front of them. So again, another American family. This is family number 3 now. And these are just the ones I'm talking about. This does not include all the different American people I have encountered in 29 years who behave like this. And for the longest time, I really thought I was doing something wrong. And it took me more than 25 years to understand that this is just the American way of life. This is the American culture. People are just rude. They don't say hello to each other. They don't ask how you are. They don't care, really. They're just rude. And it is a very uncivilized way of living. It's a very uncivilized way of behaving. And it just took me a long time to understand that. But, I have more examples. So just, a really quick example. This happened again. This was when I was high school. So even further back in the 1990s, I was a teenager. And I went to pick my one friend up. And I really, really liked her mother. Her mother was really nice. She seemed really nice. Well, I went to pick my friend up. And her mom came out and she was saying bye to her daughter, who was my friend, and have a good time, be careful, be safe. She did not acknowledge me at all. I was standing right there. Just a few feet away from her. Didn't look at me, didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge me, nothing. So finally, as my friend was getting in the car, I finally said, "Hello, Mrs." Let's call her Mrs. Smith too, because I do want to protect their identities. So I said, "Hello, Mrs. Smith. How are you? How are you doing?" And then finally she acknowledged me. But it's just repeatedly over and over and over. This is how Americans behave. It's an extremely rude behavior to completely ignore someone who's standing right there, to not even look at them, to completely ignore them, to not even say hello. That's extremely rude and it's extremely uncivilized. And it was not the way that I was raised at all.